I mean, look, winning a Juno can change your career. It is the biggest music award that we have in this country. So when the Junos put some award categories on hiatus, it can affect a lot of artists. Today on the podcast, the Juno categories no one will win next year. I'm Alameen Abdul Mahmoud. This is Commotion. I think the right place to begin is here. From Brampton, Ontario, Kirk Diamond with Dread, that is a title track to his collaboration with producer Finn. This is the album. This is the album that took home this year's Juno in the reggae category. The thing is, it looks like it might be the last album to win that award, at least for the foreseeable future, because earlier this week, Canadian press reported that the Juno Awards plan to eliminate 4 categories next year. That includes the awards for reggae recording, children's music, Christian, gospel music, and International Award Album of the Year. Now, none of these are marquee categories that are handed out even in the main Juno telecast. You don't typically see those ones on television. But for artists who are actually operating in those areas, winning a Juno can open up a lot of career opportunities for you. It absolutely does matter. So today on the podcast, we're going to talk about what the loss of these awards means for those specific music communities. We've got music journalist Dalton Higgins here and Taes Leavitt of the Juno Award-winning children's music duo Splash and Boots. Taes and Dalton, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having us.
Listen, I'm happy that you guys are here. Taes, I'm going to start with you. After the news broke that the Junos were going to eliminate the children's music category, your group, Splash and Boots, you posted this lengthy, very heartfelt, beautiful response on Facebook. Talk to me about what was going through your mind when you sort of first heard the news and made you want to write that post.
Yeah, I mean, the funny part is that we actually heard from a fan who just kind of messaged us on Facebook, and we thought, this cannot be true. That was our first response, and then we did a little research, and honestly, we were a little bit shocked, and we thought this must be a mistake. But then the Canadian press actually called us for an interview, and that's when we thought, okay, this is actually real, and maybe we should post a response, because it just felt strange and unexpected. And we wanted to really express how important this is to us, this category is to us, and to just children's music here in Canada.
This is a long, storied category. This is a category that first won by Anne Murray, a category that's been won by Sharon Lois and Bram. You've got truly legends in the space of the children's music category. What have you been hearing from other children's music performers?
Well, we've heard from lots of different children's artists across Canada, and I think you're right. I mean, this is such a big, rich history category, and we had the international, the Wiggles contacted us, and I mean, everybody feels like they're really shocked, disappointed. Fred Penna reached out, and it feels like the timing is really hard because we're already in September, and so a lot of people are saying that they had these albums ready to put into the Junos, which happens, next month. And so there's a lot of disappointment in the short notice, and there's just feeling a lot of sense of frustration within the community. And it's like people have all these hard work that they did in their project, and it suddenly just doesn't have a home anymore. So
I'm glad you brought that up because people may not be familiar with that. You maybe see the Junos happen in the spring because they typically take place in March or April. The deadlines for submissions are pretty soon, the cutoff for when you can actually make a record that is eligible for a Juno. I think it is the end of September is roughly when that's by September, all the people who make albums that get nominated will have already submitted them. Dalton, listen, you're a music journalist, you're a publicist, you're a concert promoter, you're deeply involved in the Toronto reggae scene. How is this news, the idea of the Junos dropping their reggae category, how is that being received in the scene?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a couple angles. I mean, certainly it's not being received very well. It just feels like another slap in the face to the Canadian reggae community and also the wider Caribbean community in Canada, right? Given that, a large bulk of reggae music practitioners in this country, they just happen to be Jamaican or of Caribbean descent, right? Now, the feeling within the reggae community, if you go on social media, Caris, the organization who administered the Juno Awards, I mean, they're getting ripped the last couple of days. The feeling in the community is that Caris never really cared too much about reggae music to begin with. And it's funny that when you watch the show, like if you watch the show, you almost know going in that the Reggae Award category is not going to be televised on air every year for sure. And then, but what I would also say on the flip side, I would also say that some of these like smaller music categories, like so-called world music and reggae, they're sometimes rife with scandal and controversy within, because they kind of lack oversight, right? For example, in the reggae category, it's like the same artists keep winning over and over again, right? So if you do a scan, like if you look at the last 13 years of the best reggae recording category, over the last 13 years, it's like there's only been like 5 different winners, okay? And then you had this string of years between 2012, 2017, where this artist who I actually like, Exco Levi, he won like 5 times out of a 6-year span, right?
Oh, wow.
Now, this is no fault of the artist, right? But clearly there's issues within the category itself,
First of all, I'm glad that you brought up CARIS, because that stands for the Canadian Academy of Recording Arts and Science. That's the group that organizes and administers the Junos. It's a name that people should know as you're sort of thinking about this conversation. And second, why don't we just have a listen to this?
Hello, hey, it's a hot parade. Everyone's invited. Can you hear that sound? We're gonna sing.
Listen, that voice is a very familiar voice to a lot of people. From 2020, the title track to Splash and Boots' album Heart Parade, featuring none other than Alice Cooper. Taes, listen, this was your second record to win the Juno for Children's Album of the Year. You've been nominated 7 other times. Talk to me about the impact, because I think like maybe we want to understand the idea of like, how does winning a Juno change the trajectory of an artist?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We started Splash and Boots 21 years ago. And ever since we started Splash and Boots, we were like, we want to win a Juno. So every year we would put our album in, and every year we would not get nominated for, 8 years. And in children's music, I think it's different because you're not often seen on the same level as other musicians. So it feels like we're constantly like fighting for recognition. Like we're real musicians too. So being able to actually be nominated for a Juno when it first happened, we hadn't been nominated 7 times. And then when we were actually nominated, it was such a huge deal for us because it just felt like we were actually being recognized as real musicians, which is a big deal when you come from a history of doing children's music. And I think that it really helped us with our career. It helped us book more shows. And in that time, we were kind of like, we were still sort of getting into doing more shows. We were getting more publicity from being nominated. And it also, it gave us this clear goal of just putting out this album every single year. And we've released an album every October, just knowing that the Junos are coming up. So it definitely has helped our career though, for sure, in a big way.
You're talking about credibility there, Taes. You're talking about the idea of yes, the recognition that the music that you make deserves, to be among the other categories, but then also the idea that other places would reach out and book you, right? Because you're Juno nominated, and then you are a Juno winning artist, and you sort of just lends significant amount of weight. And I think like that's the thing I want to talk about, Dalton, because I feel like this is like a missing dimension of this conversation. And maybe that doesn't apply to every single category. I want to just read out a statement here. The Canadian Academy of Recording Arts and Science, which is CARIS that you mentioned, has not released an official statement on these changes, but a letter obtained by the Canadian press claims that the changes are part of, quote, a broader set of updates that will be revealed in the near future. That's interesting to me. I can't help but wonder if the elimination or hiatus of these categories, as they're putting it, is like a comment on the health of these genres, at least according to how CARIS sees it. How do you see it, Dalton?
Yeah. I mean, I would actually, argue that it's the opposite effect. Like reggae, like the interest in reggae music is actually growing by leaps and bounds. Especially after that. It's kind of like, remember the Bob Marley biopic, One Love, that came out, and it just blew up, and now everybody's tuning into reggae. There's a song that you hear everywhere in malls. It's Lauryn Hill's son, YG Marley. It's called Praise John the Moonlight, and you hear that again ad nauseum 24/7. So interest in the music form is growing, I would argue. Now, I think in Canada, one would think that if you win a Juno Award for Best Reggae Recording, that, larger management companies would come knocking on the artist's door. Booking agents would all of a sudden become, more interested in signing up more reggae acts. But these types of things don't happen with reggae music in Canada, right? And it happens with other artists. I mean, you heard Taes say, you win a Juno, you get nominated, and the music and the business of the business, it picks up. That doesn't necessarily happen in reggae music, right? So kind of begs the question, what is going on here in Canada as far as, how we engage reggae music, in particular. I think that this Juno's decision is going to open up the canvas for bigger questions and debates and conversations tied to, the state of reggae music in this country. I mean, I used to produce, and I still do, I produce a lot of reggae concerts. Down at the Harbourfront Center, I produced a ton. And I still do community activations. I live in a neighborhood that's called Little Jamaica. So we do festivals out here. And I can tell you for a fact that the crowds at reggae concerts, we draw much larger crowds than most other genres, right?
Yeah.
So if you do an electronic music festival, jazz, blues, indie rock, reggae concerts draw a lot more people, okay? The people love it, but the Canadian, music infrastructure doesn't quite love it or engage it in the same way. So there's a real disconnect.
Yeah, I think so. I want to sit with this idea. Sorry, there's a bit of echo there coming from you, Dalton, I think. But I want to just sit with this idea that these changes are a comment on the health of these categories and whether they are or not. Because Taes, there is some speculation that these changes were prompted, by at least declining streaming numbers in some of these genres, and the same artists sort of being winning over and over and over again, which Dalton mentioned earlier. And sometimes I wonder if the popularity of animated nursery rhyme videos on YouTube has kind of maybe impacted actual artists who have been making music for children. How does that speculation square with your reality, as a working musician in the children's genre?
I mean, I think that we have to really, it's true that YouTube has changed how people consume children's content, but it hasn't actually made children's music irrelevant. And what we do is we show up in a community and we have hundreds of people come to a live concert. And that idea of having kind of what you were saying, Dalton, having, people there enjoying music in the real world, which isn't on a screen. And that's something that we haven't lost. And that sort of real world connection, that shared experience of being together at a live concert, that's why we do what we do. It's always been why we do what we do. And I think that that's the heart of a lot of music, and especially children's music. It's about bringing people together. And quite honestly, if that is true, if that's what we're looking at here, that's really disappointing. And I think that we're overlooking really the heart of what really matters in this, in favor of online trends.
We're all going to do an imagination exercise and imagine that someone at Karis is listening to this conversation right now, and you both have an opportunity to sort of give them a message. Maybe let's do, 30 seconds to each one of you. What would you like to say to someone at Karis about the idea of putting these categories on hiatus? Taes, I'll start with you.
Okay, well, I would like to urge you to strongly reconsider. Canada has a rich history of children's music. We have Fred Penner, Sharon Lois and Braham, and this award for years and years has been recognizing artists who have truly changed children's lives since, 1979. And I think that by removing this category, we're actually sending a message to kids that their music doesn't matter in the larger sort of cultural picture. And that's a big loss, not just for artists, but for Canadian culture as a whole. So I think that it is really sad to let go of something so meaningful, and I really, really urge you to reconsider.
A passionate plea. Dalton, what about you? Last word to you here.
Yeah, totally. I mean, if we know better, if you know better, do better, right? I think the reggae community has always bought into the Junos because, it's supposed to be the Canadian equivalent of the Grammys, right? Now, the Grammys, they have their own issues. They're still, but they're still sort of light years ahead of what we're doing out here. So we need to sort of treat Black music in general just with a lot more respect. I mean, the Grammy Awards, they're able to account for when they have a hip hop and R&B category. They have all of these. They can account for the diversity within the genres, right? Because reggae includes dancehall music and ska. So, we just have to treat Black music in general, I think, with just a lot more respect. And also to the reggae community, this is forcing the reggae community to look inwards, looking at this idea of producing their own award show that could more fairly present the music form in the way that it deserves to be presented, but it shouldn't be this way. We have to hold the Junos and Karis accountable,
I think that is a perfect place to leave it. Taes and Dalton, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you.
Of course. Thanks. Dalton Higgins is a music journalist based in Toronto, and Taes Leavitt is one half of the Juno Award-winning children's music duo Splash and Boots. We reached out to Karis for comment. We did not hear back in time before going to air. I'm Alamin Abdul Mahmoud. This is Commotion. I gotta tell you, I'm really starting to take a liking to a very specific genre of television, and that is Nicole Kidman playing a rich woman in the middle of a murder mystery. Right now, the #1 show on Netflix is a show called The Perfect Couple. In it, Nicole Kidman stars as this matriarch of a wealthy family. Of course, it's set in the most picturesque island of Nantucket. Her son's wedding is called off because a body washes up on the beach, and everyone becomes a suspect. The show plays with class and comedy. For instance, you have Amelia, the bride, whose working class background is at odds with her fiance's, let's say, extremely wealthy social circle. Take a listen to this.
Shooter's just so... He's just so rich.
Interesting. What? He's so rich?
Oh, okay. At Deerfield, he had bodyguards. He's like kidnap rich.
You never mentioned that.
Yeah, he plays it down. People with that kind of money don't talk about their money. Plus, I've always gotten the sense it was like Middle Eastern and something.
No, he's from India.
Exactly.
He's kidnap rich. That is a scene from the show The Perfect Couple. Vulture critic Roxana Hadadi has watched the whole thing and is here to unpack all of it. Roxana, you're here on your birthday. Happy birthday, and thanks for being here.
Thank you.
That's so
Thank
kind
you so
of
much.
you.
Yeah, the things I do for Nicole Kidman. I mean, I hope she notices.
You know what? We'll make sure that she actually hears this and goes, Roxana,
Yeah,
thank you
I
so much
think
for
that-
talking
that
about the
sounds
show
good.
on your birthday. Look, let's set up the world. Let's set up the world that we're in a little bit. Okay, The Perfect Couple is based on an Ellen Hildebrand novel. Like a lot of her books, it's set on Nantucket, real island, you know? So talk to me about Nantucket and how it kind of plays a role in the show.
Yeah, so Nantucket is in New England.
Mhm.
It is 30 miles south of Cape Cod. So we're talking about like the Boston area, very historical, and a major summer destination for tourism. So Nantucket basically becomes overrun by very wealthy summer tourists. And you sort of know that from real life because home sales are averaging like $2 to $3 million because it's an island, right? Like there isn't that much
Sure,
space
not a lot
to
of real
live.
estate. Yeah.
Yeah, not a lot of real estate. So a lot of Hildebrand's novels sort of take place in this space. She did move to Nantucket in the early 90s. And I think she does this excellent job building this place where everybody sort of knows each other. Everybody sort of knows how much money everyone else has.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of sort of both really beautiful descriptions of like seafood feasts and flower gardens, and also a lot of really fun backstabbing and infidelity and domestic drama. So you get that all in the novels, right? And
Yeah.
then you're really getting that in this Netflix adaptation,
Yeah.
where Nicole Kidman's character is the matriarch of this family, and on one hand, she like is complaining about the hydrangeas in the garden over and over. She hates these hydrangeas. But she also is really worried about how people view her family, right? There is
Yeah.
a lot of secrecy and concern. So yeah, I think that you really get a sense of like class and infighting, but with a little bit of a different tone from how we've seen these shows handle this before.
Well, I kind of want to talk about a category that you coined, which is the category, the genre of mother thriller, which is to describe
Right.
all these prestige shows that we're getting that are just sort of centered around mothers and their thrillers in this category. Do you want to talk about how The Perfect Couple falls into the category? Does it fall into the category of mother thriller?
Yeah. I definitely think it does. I will say all kudos to my editors for coming up with this term for which I was describing many tropes and cliches.
Yeah.
But it all goes back to Big Little Lies, right? Like Big
Yes.
Little Lies exploded on this scene in this very rarefied world of mostly white women.
Because Nicole
Dealing with a
Kidman
murder.
and Reese Witherspoon.
Kidman, Reese
Yeah.
Witherspoon,
Yeah.
Laura Dern,
Laura
you know, all these
Dern,
very
yes.
recognizable faces.
Yeah.
And that really sort of set off a trend of like Leanne Moriarty adaptations
Mhm.
and just series that dealt with some similar things, right? Like these women are rich, but they're unhappy. There's definitely a murder. There's always a murder.
There's got to be a murder, yes.
And always a murder. And the way that we sort of uncover the murder is through like a very flashback heavy narrative, right? So you're unpeeling different layers of people's identities. And I definitely think Perfect Couple fits into that. We do get the flashbacks to seeing what happened on the night before this wedding that led to a murder, right? What are the secret dynamics between these people? How are they lying to each other? How are they lying to themselves? And as we discussed earlier, there's a lot of wealth here, right? Like it is a mansion on the beach in which Nicole Kidman and her husband, played by Liev Schreiber, live very easily with a domestic staff, right? So all of these elements are there in a slightly different formula, I would say, than Big Little Lies or Apples Never Fall or the other shows that we've gotten in this genre.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that a little bit because, there's the White Lotus in that category. Big Little Lies is certainly in this category. Well, something that you wrote about The Perfect Couple, though, is that it's a relief to watch it, subvert some of the tropes that we're seeing in this genre. Tell me about that. Why does it feel like a relief to watch the show, you think?
Well, I think there's this really interesting tension in these shows, I think, where I think sometimes these shows almost feel like they are ashamed of their component parts, right? Like they're a little bit worried about being just seen as women's entertainment, right? So I think a lot of these shows also are very self-serious. There's like a very almost like somber tone where the shows are sort of begging to be taken seriously, right? They're about like feminism and domestic abuse and sexism and all these things that are like incredibly valid. I don't want to say that like
let's make shows
television
about those
deal with
issues.
these
Yes.
themes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they're like in capital letters handled, right? Like there's no room for fun or like some levity.
Yeah.
But I think The Perfect Couple really understands that like being a woman is difficult. But also it means that you can be a woman who goes through her future sister-in-law's wedding gifts and steals the ones that she likes, right? Like there's also a little bit of space for like ludicrous, look at how the rich people live. And that's just fun. I think I like that.
Okay, I got like maybe a couple of minutes left here. Let's talk about how the fact that most of the comedy in the show is about the class tensions, right? The class tensions between Amelia, who's this working class bride, and then the wealthy family of the fiance. But also you have these blue collar detectives who are investigating this rich family. Do you think the show manages to pull off landing, the way that these tensions are sometimes so funny?
I think it does, because I don't think you could watch this show and come away with thinking like, oh, the rich people were right. I think you really get a sense that they are really sort of terrible, right? And the promise of all this money and growing up among all this prestige is like soul corroding. And there's a little bit of fantasy in that, right?
Sure.
Like it's really nice to be told like, oh, actually being rich is terrible. That's almost its own sort of
I
fantasy.
often want to hear that from television. Yes.
Yeah, I want to hear that. But I do think there's a suspension of disbelief that the show pulls off pretty well and lands like with this sarcastic tone. And there's one moment that I think really does this well, which is where you have this iconic French actress, Isabelle Adjani, who like people will know from Possession and from winning like 1 million awards. And in this, she is playing a woman who is having an affair with one of the younger sons. And she makes fun of him for investing in crypto. And just the way that that conversation occurs, I was like, okay, this show understands the space in which it's playing. And that feels like a relief, like I said earlier.
That's a beautiful place to leave it, I think. Roxana, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you being here on your birthday, friend. Thank you so much for coming on. Of course. Thanks for coming on. You betcha. Anytime. Roxana Hadadi is a TV critic at Vulture. The Perfect Couple is on Netflix right now. I got to tell you, I've not had a chance to watch The Perfect Couple because it's still the Toronto International Film Festival this week. All this week, we've been doing a special podcast that we've been dropping into our podcast feed every single day. It's called Tiff and 12. It's me and Rad Simon Pillay and Terry Hart. And we talk just for 12 minutes about the movies that we've been seeing, about our reactions to this year's festival. I would highly recommend that you find that on our podcast feed. In the meantime, my name is Alamin Abdul Mahmoud. This show is called Commotion. And you know what? I'll see you tomorrow.